Wow, it's been a while. We hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us. Turns out this episode took us a lot of research. So, what happened? At the end of May, Cetus, a decentralized exchange on the Sui blockchain, faced a crisis. The liquidity pools that provide the exchange with capital were being drained of all their tokens and fast. Cetus hit the pause button after 15 minutes, but already 200 some million dollars were gone. Looking at the record on the blockchain sets a mystery, a flash swap, a liquidity add, and withdrawals. For those, like us, not steeped in this world, these are standard DeFi operations. Don't worry, we'll explain. But at the end of the transaction, the liquidity is gone. So what broke? Follow along as we piece it together. Sometimes when you give a little, you get a lot. This is Not Your Crypto Podcast. Hi, we're back, and we've been on an enforced hiatus, a surprising enforced hiatus on this one. Thank you for our listeners, returning listeners, and having patience with us, number one. We did not intend to take such a long break. Quite honestly, we've recorded this before, haven't we, Michael?
We did. We took one attempt at this, and we got, 15 minutes in, and then we were like, we do not understand what we are talking about here.
I think we even got further. I think we were basically starting
Yeah,
to
that's true. We might have been almost done. Yeah.
We were almost done. And then we were like, honestly, actually, now that we're going through this and speaking this out loud, there are questions we don't have answers to. And that was because there were gaps in our fundamental understanding.
And good thing, too, because we were just straight up wrong on some stuff.
Yeah, we were completely incorrect on some things as well. And as we would not do a disservice to our listeners by pumping that out or editing it in post using AI, because that's not how we are. We're professionals. So what are we talking about? Today, we're here to basically begin a 3-part series. That is, ladies and gentlemen, hold on to your hats. It's a 3-part series, basically covering a hack that occurred at the end of May on a decentralized liquidity provider known as Cetus, which also had decentralized exchange functionality as well. That's what it's kind of known for. I think we're going to go into these terms a little bit again. The reason this is a 3-parter is because it was a doozy of a hack, an absolute doozy of a hack. So Cetus is the largest decentralized exchange on a layer 1 protocol known as Sui. Absolutely get excited over. Not that obviously stealing money is a good thing. Let's be very clear on that. We're not condoning that. But in terms of being able to pull this off, the way they threaded the needle on this one was seriously impressive. And the reason it was seriously impressive is because it was one of those security bugs that actually was an exploit of 2 separate contexts. What do we mean by that? There's the natural good old-fashioned bug in the code, figuring out how to exploit it and then leverage it for your actual gain as an attacker. But there was also a few assumptions made there's the business logic of what the app did, and there were assumptions made in that and bugs in that the hacker also leveraged. So they exploited the code and they exploited the business logic of the application which it existed in order to be able to execute their attack. And they did it repeatedly. So we're going to dive into this straight away, just to give you an outline of this 3-part series. The first 2 parts are going to be the exploit in one context. I think the first one is going to be the exploit in the decentralized exchange, and what the logic there, and the assumptions that were made in that logic that the attacker took advantage of. The second one is going to be the security bug in code. Second part is going to be about the exploit of this code that was embedded in this application itself. And then the third and final part is going to be about the resolution, because unlike Web 2, as we've said frequently in the past, Web 3 has very interesting resolution cycles, and it's relatively democratized in terms of being decentralized. People get to have opinions on what should be done in order to rectify the situation. And that threw up some very interesting philosophical debates that we also like to tap into as well. So please stick with us. This is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be quite educational. First and foremost, we're going to talk about Michael, should we jump into what a liquidity provider is, what Cetus was doing?
Yeah, we should. Mm-hmm. We should.
So, go on.
Okay. So I don't know. So I mean, we were joking about this. It's hard not to think back to stuff we talked about when we did our first attempt at this. We were joking about this though, that we are both not really DeFi guys. No, you know what really. I mean? I don't know. I think I said I struggle to care a lot about DeFi. It just hasn't resonated with me super hard. But anyway, but we went pretty deep on it for this because it is very important to this hack.
Yeah.
And it is interesting. So, okay. So So we're going to explain what a decentralized exchange is a little bit and some of the functionality it provides, right?
Yeah.
So like if I'm like in crypto, I have all these different tokens. One thing I want to do a lot of the time is exchange one of these tokens for another, right?
Yeah.
Straight parallel to like having a kind of currency that I want to exchange for another kind of currency. Like I have USD and I want to exchange it for pounds or whatever.
Yeah, or euros or
I don't
something.
know.
Yeah.
Okay. So the most straightforward way you can like mentally model that is like there's an organization or an entity, a business that I go to. That business has a bunch of reserves of tokens or currency or assets or whatever,
Yeah.
and I give that some money in one form, and it exchanges it for me and gives it back, right?
Yep.
That's like a centralized exchange. So
Yep.
there's a centralized entity that I'm interacting with to that performs the exchange for me, sets the exchange rate,
Yep.
holds the reserves that are necessary to perform the exchange. So there are those in crypto and in the kind of blockchain world. There are centralized exchanges, and many of them. There is also another thing, a separate thing, which doesn't really have a parallel in our world. I think in our world,
Not that I could think of.
in the traditional world,
in the traditional finance world, that we'd understand now.
Called a decentralized exchange. So a decentralized exchange is a thing that provides this core exchange functionality. It'll take one token and exchange it and give me back a different token at some exchange rates. But it does it without a centralized entity. It does it basically through smart contracts. So it does it in a decentralized way. And that's like, there's a lot of things that you should just like step back and appreciate how kind of wacky they are that they exist, but they do. So this is a thing that exists. A lot of things you would like never predict would exist now exist in this world.
100.
Okay, so like in order for these decentralized exchanges to work, right? They're smart contracts broadly. They're a bunch of smart contracts and accounts and whatever on that interact with each other on the blockchain. They need to offer functionality through those smart contracts for you to use, right?
Yeah.
And they need to offer that functionality on two sides.
Yes.
They need to offer it, one, to the person who wants to use the exchange. So I need to be able to call this, function, give it tokens and get back tokens. But then they also need to offer functionality to people who want to contribute to the operation of the exchange, right? And in particular, like one of the really important pieces there is that people, like users of the blockchain, need to supply liquidity to these decentralized exchanges for them to use to do the exchange.
Yeah. So effectively, this is where you get into the jargon now. So effectively what happens is these collections of these cryptocurrencies that people have now supplied to this decentralized exchange in the expectation that they will make money for doing so, i.e. putting your savings in a bank and getting interest, they're known as literally liquidity pools, because that's what they do. They provide liquidity. They allow the ecosystem to thrive, because now if you've got these random set of currencies, in order to be basically trade them, use them, buy them, sell them, exchange them for whatever, you need to be able to go somewhere to get them in the first place. And so that's why you have these decentralized exchanges becoming liquidity providers as well, because it's just good business. They basically pay you a fee for giving them the money. They charge a higher fee for people borrowing. It's basically good old-fashioned finance in that respect. It's just set up in a non-traditional way because it's a decentralized entity supposedly sharing its profits more democratically.
Yeah,
and more
it's democratized, right? This is like the whole thing about DeFi is like democratizing these things that traditionally, these financial instruments and processes that traditionally are only available to banks, that sort of thing, right?
Large players, large whales. So yes, you have these liquidity pools, and they can be made up. They can have more than one pool, number one, and they can be made up of. They're always made up of pairs of tokens, which is where it gets interesting. And so pairs of cryptocurrencies. So exactly like Michael was saying at the beginning of this, at the beginning of the podcast, it'd be the equivalent of going into a shop and saying, "Okay, where are your what what products do you have? I want to get euros. And they will go, okay, we've got a pool of euros to USD, and therefore we'll loan you at this rate, or we'll pay you at this rate if you actually lend us your USD or your euro. And so basically what you have is you have these ideas of liquidity pools, and they're run by these decentralized exchanges, but they also have a unique feature set of their own. And this is where it gets interesting. So everybody pay attention, bring out your notebooks if necessary to try and track through this. So they have these concepts of flash loans and flash swaps. I think flash loans actually do exist in traditional finance, whereas flash swaps, I'm not so sure of. But as per usual, decentralized infrastructure has its own take on these things. Michael, do you want to jump in and explain, first of all, what a flash loan is, and then a flash swap and how they differ, and how they make this attack extremely interesting to the casual observer or the not so casual observer?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah. So flash loads, basically, like, just start with like a high level overview. A flash loan. So there's a liquidity pool in a DEX. I want to borrow tokens from that liquidity pool. So I want to borrow those tokens, use them for something else, and then give them back. So the part of the the part of it that's particularly different in DEXs and decentralized DeFi, whatever kind of stuff, is that I can roll up as a user to this decentralized exchange and say, from this pool, I would like to borrow X amount of tokens. It can be a large number of tokens.
Yep.
And it will just give me those tokens to use, so long as I give them back within the same transaction, within the same transaction block. So the way it works is, like, let's say that I did a flash swap, and then within the same transaction I didn't give those tokens back, then the whole transaction would fail.
Yeah.
So it, like, from the outside, it's like I didn't even get them in the first place.
Yep.
Basically, right? So
effectively,
okay.
It's like nothing happened, basically.
It's like
and
nothing
that's
happened.
What they're counting on.
And even if it works from the outside, it's almost like nothing happened.
Again.
At least from the perspective of the DEX, because I took I loaned these tokens out, did something with them within like the 10 seconds or whatever it takes, or less, I don't know, and then deposited them back. And so from the perspective of a transaction before and the transaction after, to that pool, it's like nothing happened. The number of tokens in there didn't change. The liquidity didn't change. I just borrowed it, did a thing, and gave them back. And that's kind of guaranteed by the protocol itself. Like, that's not... So this is like the trustless part, right?
Yes.
Like, the protocol is built so that, in theory, you don't actually need to trust that I'll give them back. The protocol itself enforces that if I don't give them back, then I actually never took them out in the first place, like a little magic trick.
Basically,
you know,
it's almost like stepping outside of the timeline of events and then stepping back in, and you've not changed anything in that original timeline, nothing materially anyway. But yeah, so effectively, that's what happens with the flash loan. And the unique thing about this is, compared to traditional finance, is you're not required to post any collateral whatsoever. You can rock up with nothing. It's completely trustless. So basically the enforcement of the fact that you will be able to do this thing, or you are entrusted with these tokens, is that, well, if it doesn't work out, if it doesn't net out 0-0 by the end of the transaction, you don't get anything in the first place. But obviously they do charge you a fee if you are able to successfully execute the transaction, and that is how they make their money. So that's a flash loan. Flash swap. Now, the reason why we're talking about what flash loan is just to give you an basic understanding of what could be happening here, because a flash swap is like a sibling, an interesting sibling to the flash loan, and is also key to this attack. Again, back to what we said at the beginning of this, or what I said at the beginning of this podcast, is we're talking about different contexts being exploited here, and more importantly, the operational assumptions that are embedded in these contexts that allow them to exist as basically realities. This is how DeFi works. This is how the code works. And there are assumptions made therein, and they were exploited to some devastating effect. So now let's go into flash swaps, basically.
Yeah. So, okay. So flash loan is, I take out token. Let's say I take out USDC. I pay back that same amount of USDC plus a fee or whatever, right?
Yep.
So remember, these pools, like you said, these pools are two-sided. So like, because this is an exchange, right? So every pool is comprised of a token A, and another token, token B.
Yeah.
And the differing amounts of those tokens is what sets the exchange, right? With this formula, what's called constant product formula or something like
Yes,
that, right? Anyway,
correct.
you can look that up separately. I don't know it. You can look it up separately if you want. Not a DeFi guy.
Yeah, we give homework here.
Yeah, exactly. But okay, so a flash loan, I take out, let's say token A USDC, I get back token A USDC. Let's say it's a USDC SUI pool, which one of them was.
Yeah.
A flash swap is different a little bit. In a flash swap, there's like super complicated ways to describe it, I guess. But like the way I think about it is what I end up holding is token B, like the token that I get permission to use, like the token that is transferred to me is token B, like SUI, let's say. But then what I owe, like what I need to pay back to complete the transaction, what I need to repay, the receipt that I get to pay is denominated in the other token in USDC.
Yeah.
So it's basically as if I had taken out a loan in USDC and then immediately swapped it on the exchange to SUI.
One way I like to think of it as a mental model in terms of having tokens in a pool, two tokens, a pair of tokens that are equivalent to a value amount in a pool or liquidity value, is to think of it like when you're buying, I imagine the tokens represent shares in a company. So basically, you can have an amount of shares, but they equate to a certain value dependent on the shares value itself, obviously, or how well the company's doing. But the point is that can fluctuate. And you can have a certain amount of shares as a ratio of a company. And basically, depending on the value of those shares, depends on how much value you have in the company. Does that kind of make sense to you? So basically, the tokens are an abstraction of a share of the pool. That's kind of the way I kind of think about it. So a certain amount of tokens will give you access to a certain amount. Oh, basically, in this case, when you're doing a flash swap, they give you temporary permissions over a certain amount of the pool. And that's worked out using that constant product formula that you mentioned earlier. Does that make sense to you?
That does make sense. Yes, that does make sense. And I think it leads a little bit into like another concept that's important here, which is like the liquidity value stuff, right? Should we?
Yes. I think we should go
that
there
a little bit up front.
Definitely, because that is key to this.
So like basically, when if I'm being a liquidity provider to the pool, that's like a person who like deposits tokens into the pool to be used as liquidity. What the DEX actually like keeps track of for me isn't directly like, oh, you deposited 100 USDC or you deposited like 50 SUI and 50 USDC or something, in terms of when I go to like pull my liquidity back out, or when I go to add liquidity or whatever. Instead, it keeps track of like an abstraction on top of that, which is this thing called liquidity value. And so what actually happens, like, let's focus on like depositing liquidity into the pool, because that's going to be the most important bit for the attack chain. I can, when I go to add liquidity to the pool, I can add liquidity two ways. I can say like, here's this much token. I think I can do this. And it'll say, okay, you added this much liquidity value. Or I can do it kind of the other way around and say, go up to the pool and say, hey, I want to add this much liquidity value. I want to add like, I forget what scale of numbers it is, but I want to add like 1,000 units of liquidity value. And then the DEX will say back to me, okay, that means you need to add this many of token A and this many of token B.
100%.
Or maybe you just need to add this much of token A. That depends on something else we'll talk about in a little bit. But basically, there's an abstraction layer on top of the actual tokens in the pool, which is this liquidity value.
100%.
And that should, the like spoiler or whatever, is that should like perk your ears up a little bit, right? Because what's in the pool is tokens. And then there's an abstraction on top, which is liquidity value. And that liquidity value, in order for the like integrity of the pool to stay, that liquidity value needs to track the tokens in the pool, right? So like if it doesn't, if that liquidity value somehow, some way kind of breaks that association between liquidity value and amount of tokens in the pool, um, there's going to be trouble, right? Like
There is definitely going to be trouble.
that's space for something to happen.
Right. And yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that summarizes how a liquidity pool works, and two of the most interesting features of a liquidity pool, one of which is basically the center of attention in terms of how this attack was carried out. So we're going to jump into the attack chain, and we're going to explain, if we need to do any more explain this as we go along, we will. But what you need to know is you've got this pool, you've got the various pools with pairs of tokens, and you have this concept of liquidity value, and then you have tokens that equate to a liquidity value. Those are all the abstractions so far. And by tokens, we mean assets, and by assets, we mean cryptocurrencies, your equivalent of USDC, which is a stablecoin, SUI, bunch of other coins. There's a whole forest of coins out there you can go and research. Each LOM has its own sound type, but yes, they're just, think of it as cryptocurrencies, but they're always held in pairs in these liquidity pools. So an attacker came along one day, should we say, and realized that there are some assumptions here. And I'm just going to go out and say it right now. You had to have had, this attacker clearly had intimate knowledge of how liquidity pools work, because there is no way you would do this from just studying from the outset. Because as you can tell, even with all the studying Michael and I are doing, we're still trying to get our heads around it to make sure we can understand it completely. They had to have intimate knowledge around how liquidity pools are structured, how they're built, how they work, and the features that they have, and how those assumptions within each of those features can be exploited. So what we have here is step one. Attacker rocks up to Cetus, and they notice that they have a bug in one of their libraries. Is that the best thing to start off with? There's a bug in their library, and so they try to sit around, and they basically don't even try and sit down. Basically, their first idea is, I know how I can exploit this because of the assumptions that are made within this liquidity pool about liquidity value and token amounts. So the first thing they do is a flash swap. Is that correct, Michael? They do a flash swap.
That is correct. The first thing they do is a flash swap.
Is a flash swop.
So the attacker knows there's a bug in this library. We're being a bit vague about that because we're going to talk about the details of the bug later.
Yep.
What the attacker sees, and their like objective is basically, I want to end up owning all of the liquidity in this pool, both sides, right?
Yep.
Okay, so their first step is to do a flash swap, completely normal operation. Goes off just completely normally, right? Like it's nothing wrong here. Except like the thing that might be a bit weird about it is they take out kind of a lot. Like they loan kind of a lot, I guess.
Yes, they do.
Like the whole, I think it's usually like the whole value of one side of the pool.
Yeah.
But that can be fine too, right? Because they're going to put it back. So
exactly.
So first step, they take out a flash swap. They own, they take control over like the SUI side of the pool to use. And they end up owing a large amount of the other side of the pool, USDC, whatever it is.
In this one example.
That's the first step. But so far, nothing has gone awry.
Right? Yeah, so far, so normal. Where it starts to get very strange is in step two. So effectively, when you're actually depositing your tokens into a pool, normally under normal operations, again, you'd be asked to deposit one set, token A and token B, and as a ratio, the amount would be as a ratio of another. So if it's a 1-to-3 swap, 1 SUI to 1 USDC or 3 USDC, you'd be expected to deposit that amount into the pool. So for every one, you're supposed to deposit 3. That only holds true so long as you're in a specific range. We won't go into ranges for now because that's just a bit more detail than is necessary to find out how this attack works. But there is a specific scenario where you can actually deposit only one side of the token pair. And that's when you deposit that token to work outside of the normal range. Again, range is it's a config, basically, the way Michael likes to describe it, the way I like to think about it. You're going to deposit this one thing at this token at this range, then the configuration of the way and your token will be used in that pool changes. And it allows you, in this case, to have to only deposit one of the token pairs. And what the attacker did was they created an unusual range, a very, very narrow range, at which the tokens could actually be used when trading in a pool. Because let's not forget, basically, if you're depositing your tokens into a pool expecting to earn a fee from traders doing all types of shenanigans with them, you can actually dictate at what price ranges you want your tokens to be used. And that's where this range comes from. But basically what they did was they configured an unnaturally very, very narrow range. this will matter for the
And
next step.
outside of the range of the current like exchange
Yes.
of the pool, right?
Yes, it was outside of the range of the current exchange of the pool. And
Mm-hmm.
please remember, they didn't just do this once. Go on.
Yeah, true. Which can also be fine, right? So like basically the sequence here is, okay, I'm going to take out a flash swap.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, here's your flash swap. Then the attacker, in the the very next step, the attacker rolls back up to the DEX and says, hello again. Now I would like to deposit some liquidity in you.
Yeah.
Right. I would like to be a liquidity provider. I would like to deposit some liquidity. Okay.
Yeah.
Also a normal, fine step to do.
Yep.
I don't know, probably something that happens this sequence, probably something that happens, I guess.
Yep.
Okay. So in order to deposit that liquidity, like you said, they need this config. You set up this configuration first. It's called a position.
Mm-hmm.
This is because it's the kind of pool that these exchanges run now. What are they called? CLMM or something?
Yes.
I forget what that acronym
Concentrated
stands for.
liquidity market.
Concentrated liquidity, yeah. Basically, you say, I'm going to add this liquidity, but I want to add this liquidity to this like specific place on the price curve, basically.
Yes.
I don't know, something like that. Saying basically too much. But
it's okay.
Yeah, it makes things sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
Okay, so they do the flash swap. They roll back up and say, okay, now I would like to provide liquidity, please.
Mm-hmm.
They set up a position to provide that liquidity, a configuration to provide that liquidity.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, okay, now I'm going to add the liquidity. I would like to add this liquidity value.
Yeah.
And the liquidity value that they say they want to add is very large. Very large number.
Yeah,
so
very, very large number.
What you would expect is the DEX would come back and say, okay, to add that amount of liquidity at this position, you need huge amount of coin.
Yep.
A huge amount of token.
More token than actually exists, quite frankly. That's the expectation.
Yeah, because we're dealing with big number.
Yeah.
But what actually happens, and this is where the bug is, what actually happens is the DEX comes back and says, okay, you need to add 1 token. It was actually, I don't think it was actually 1. I think it was actually like the smallest possible value, like subdivision of the token or something. Anyway, I forget exactly the details there. But for simplicity, we can say 1.
1.
And maybe if there's like listeners who are like clued into the security stuff and you hear you roll up with a really big number and then the output is a really small number, you might have kind of a guess what kind of bug we're talking about, but we won't talk about that now. That's future episode. But basically that's the bug. So what that allows the attacker to do is mint, like create a huge amount of liquidity value ascribed to themselves.
Yep.
But only provide almost none of that in actual token.
Yeah.
And so like we were talking earlier about the important bit of these pools is that is keeping that integrity. Well, an important bit. There's lots of important bits of these things, but for this attack, an important bit of these pools is keeping that integrity between the liquidity value that is tracked for users and the token value in the actual pool. And this is where that breaks. The user is able to mint a large amount of liquidity value ascribed to themselves, but not actually provide the liquidity. Only provide like an extremely nominal token amount.
Yes, and this is from the outside, from an outside observer to myself. This is basically bordering on magic, really and truly, because at the end of the day, be able to see such a simple, and it is a benign bug that existed in code bases time immemorial, and actually realize that they could exploit it.
It's going to be a throwback. This is going to be a throwback.
It's going to be a massive throwback. To actually exploit it in such an abstract set of circumstances as is a DeFi liquidity pool. I mean, it was just, to me, it was impressive, as I've said at the top of this podcast. Yeah. And so effectively what they've now done is they have now become temporary owner of a large amount of tokens in the pool because they've been given a large amount of liquidity ascribed to them as
and
much.
So like let's just remember like the overall state here right now, right? They have control over basically the entire, from the flash swap, they have control over the SUI side of the pool, like pretty much all the tokens in the SUI side of the pool.
Yep.
They're owing from the flash swap, owing a large amount of the other side of the pool, USDC or whatever.
Yep.
But what they now have is a liquidity value
Mhm.
that is like, I think as large or maybe even larger than the entire value of the rest of the tokens still in the pool.
Yep.
So they have control over the SUI. They're owing USDC, and
And
they now also have huge liquidity value.
huge liquidity
That's the
value.
current state of the attacker.
Yeah, which let's not forget reverts back to, in the model, liquidity value is equivalent to tokens in the pool. So effectively, they now have they have the ability to pay back that initial loan that was made to them via the flash swap. So effectively, that's the next step. It's okay. Oh, I from step one, I owe you all this money. I'm going to pay it back now, and that's what they do. They pay back or the liquidity that they used in the flash swap, again, from the pool. So they haven't put up any collateral in any of this. Let's not forget that. And then they repay back. Then the pool then says, oh, by the way, remember you said you was going to add that liquidity, the initial one, the second one, in terms of being able to get in liquidity value, where I said to you, need to give me one token to get this value. So then the attacker pays that one token back into the pool from the pool itself. This is magic. And then after that, they're like, oh, but I also own the rest of the liquidity value in the pool. Again, equates to token value. I'm going to withdraw all of these tokens because, yeah, they're mine now. And gone. Poof, magic, rides off into the sunset. But they don't ride off into the sunset. They go to the next pool. I'm laughing. This isn't funny. Right? People were impacted.
Yeah,
it's the novel value of this is crazy. And so
one thing that's very distinctive about the crypto attacks, which I think like can make them seem a little humorous, is part of it is because they're like open, they're public, right?
Yeah.
It's just how brazen they feel, right?
Oh my God.
Like
so brazen.
Because you can see everything happening. Everything's happening in real time. People see the transactions going on. It just keeps going, whatever. It just feels very like brazen. Anyway.
It's extremely brazen.
Like what the liquidity value gives you is the like right to recall tokens out of the pool.
Yes. Right? That's what I was thinking of a succinct statement to say that, and that's exactly it. It's an IOU for you.
And like you have to think like in these liquidity pools, the way they work is real. Yeah, with these IOUs, right? Like you talked about, okay, flash swap, what you get value and you're given a receipt, like a debt that you need to pay. Yes. They call it a receipt, I think, in the code.
Yeah, they do.
And it's the same thing, like you said, when you add liquidity. When I add liquidity, what actually happens like under the hood is I say I want to add this liquidity value. It says okay, and then it gives me a receipt for how much how much token I need to pay, and then I need to pay that later. So it's like I get an asset, liquidity value, and I incur a debt, which is this receipt that I need to pay.
Yeah.
And so like one of the fascinating things about the structure of this attack is the way that the attacker uses their minted liquidity value, like their uses that massive liquidity value that they minted to repay all the receipts that they incur throughout the attack itself. And that's why they don't have to put up any, like they don't need one token to mint the liquidity value, because actually what happens is they add the liquidity value, they're given a debt, and then they pull that liquidity out of the pool to pay that debt. So there's like 3 stages of this, right? They get the SUI through the flash swap.
Yep.
They incur a debt. They mint a huge liquidity value.
Yep.
That huge liquidity value lets them repay the debt from the pool itself.
Yep.
Kind of go back in time and add the liquidity from the pool itself.
Yep.
And then it lets them drain out the rest of the value remaining in the pool itself.
Exactly.
Which is now entirely on like the USDC side, like the token A side of the pool. And then at the end of the day, they've accomplished their objective, right? They own
100%.
They have control over the SUI side from the flash swap, and then the USDC side from minting that huge liquidity value, paying their debts, and then draining the remaining liquidity.
And that's why they call it draining the pool. It is literally just going into the bank, opening the safe, taking it all, and walking off into the distance. But they didn't, as I said earlier. The hint here is that they came back and they came and hit Cetus by my rough count, or our rough count, 265 times. There were 265 pools, and they could have kept going, but they got stopped by Cetus's IR team, which kicked in within 15 minutes, which is still an impressive time. But yes, a lot
Yes.
of money went in that time. And we've spoken about this before. The one thing about crypto is velocity, and its
Yep.
velocity is just staggering, and it will never not be shocking to old head like me and Michael, because a lot of money can go walking out the door very, very quickly. So yeah, 265 pools at the last rough approximate count were drained in this exact same manner.
In 15 minutes. Yeah.
Within 15 minutes. Okay, that's a lot to wrap your head around, but the rabbit hole continues. We would like you to stick around for our next episode, because in the next episode we're going to revisit step 3, where this somehow, some way, this attacker was able to add a large number but only be on the hook for a very small number. Answers on a postcard, please, if you're a security professional. What could be going on under the hood? Thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking with us so far if you have. We'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you and goodbye.